In this opening frame, we find City at the Wembley of the North. Manchester City had moved into Main Road, their new ground, in 1923, and there they would stay until 2002. A decade after moving in, they would begin the hunt for silverware, and in the mid-30s enjoyed successive cup final appearances. Here we see fans travelling down to London for the 1934 FA Cup final. The side would also win the championship in 1937, but bizarrely and typically of City, they would be relegated the following year. Perhaps City's most famous FA Cup final appearance appears in 1956, the so-called Bert Trautmann Cup final. City would win the game 3-1, but the game is marked most for Trautmann breaking his neck late in the game, making a heroic save at the feet of a Birmingham attacker. The game is also notable for the so-called Revie plan. Don Revie was a feature player for City in this era, and he played as a withdrawn centre forward, very much mimicking the modern style of the way that teams are set up. That plan was dubbed the Revie plan. Of course, Revie would later become famous as a very successful manager for Leeds United, then for England, and then latterly over here in the Emirates. A decade after the Revie plan, Joe Mercer and his assistant Malcolm Allison would drive City on to a new era of glory, and arguably the defining moment for the club before the modern era. Mercer and Allison would win the league in '68, win the cup in '69, win the European Cup Winners' Cup and the League Cup in 1970. Their years were not only marked by glory, but a style of attacking play that many City fans still demand in the modern era. One of the mainstays of this team was Francis Lee, part of the Bell, Lee and Summerby trilogy. Lee was a strong and combative centre forward for the club until he left in the early 70s. He would return later as chairman, and whilst many expected a return to glory, by the time that he returned in the mid-90s, the club had fallen on hard times. Actually, worse was to follow, and Lee would drive the club to their lowest ebb in 1998 with relegation to the third tier. The following year, the side would bounce back in remarkable terms. By this time, Lee had resigned as chairman and had been replaced by David Bernstein. In the playoff final, with City as marked favourites, just like they are in their final game of the league today against QPR, they find themselves 2-0 down with time running out. Incredibly and remarkably, and only in the way that City can, they engineer a comeback and claw the game back to 2-2 by full time, and will eventually win on penalties. From 1999, we move forward by a whole decade. And this is Roberto Mancini in our final shot. Mancini took over the club in that year, and in the 2.5 years since, under his stewardship, the club has gone on to emulate that great side of the late 60s and early 70s. It's already won the cup, it's showing promise in the Champions League, and its destiny awaits in the Premiership.